So for part 2 of our makeup class, we are going to talk about other aspects of litigation and the documents that are available. One important aspect that you should not forget about, of course, are court rules. As you may remember in the chart we saw in the handout on authority, court rules are part of primary authority. They're not as authoritative as statutes, but they are important. The things you want to remember about court rules, other than the fact that you have to check them, especially if you're involved in litigation, or most especially if you're involved in litigation, is that there are different levels. So you have court rules that are jurisdiction-wide, whether that's a federal jurisdiction or a state. So we are looking, for example, here at your handout, which is available on the course handouts page, at the Federal and New York procedural rules. So there's, of course, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure you spent most of Civ Pro talking about. We also have the New York CPLR. These can affect substantive rights like statutes of limitations. Some of these rules, like the CPLR, are actually statutory. You will find the CPLR in McKinney's. They are passed by the New York legislature. That is not true for the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. They are prepared by the Judicial Advisory Committee. But there, in addition to these jurisdiction-wide rules, sometimes these rules are subject applicable. So, of course, we have criminal procedure and other procedural acts depending on the type of court. We have the rules of evidence and sentencing. We also have court-specific rules. So, the Supreme Court of the United States has its own rules, as do various courts of the appellate courts, as well as New York state courts. So you want to be aware of which rules and which jurisdiction apply. The specific court rules, and actually here in New York we have individual judges have their own rules. Obviously, the smaller the jurisdiction, going down to the judge, the more specific those rules will be. So by specific, I mean you could have words per page as part of a rule. And you can see on this handout, again, which is available on the course website, the different places online you can find these rules. Let's also look at where you can find these rules online. So on Westlaw, and typically, generally, when you're looking for rules, even though they tend not to be passed by the legislature, the CPLR being an exception to that, you still want to look in the statutory area. So, for instance, if we go to the U.S. Code Annotated, actually, what you will find here on the right are federal court rules. So if you wanted to search them on Westlaw, that would be one way. They are also in the USCA as appendices following the relevant title. So Title 8, you find the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. After Title 18, Crimes and Criminal Procedure. Federal, you find the Federal Sentencing Guidelines, as well as the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. If we take a look at New York, and we go to statutes and court rules, actually Westlaw puts that here for us if we want to just search the rules of court, but within McKinney's, you can actually find New York federal court rules here on the side. You will find McKinney's actually, if you scroll down here, the table of contents at the bottom, but you saw it pulled out in the prior screen. So that's how you would search the rules independently if you are just doing a search. Let's go back. So let's think about frivolous lawsuits. Again, this is the key if you are looking for rules that have to do with a particular subject, like frivolous lawsuits. You want to go to statutes, and what you'll notice here is good old Rule 11, as I'm sure you remember from the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. I'm searching here New York federal and state, so I'll get both at the moment. If I limit our jurisdiction just federal, I do get some statutory results, but I also get federal rules results as well. So here we can see a Court of Appeals DC Circuit rule, and obviously you can use your filters to limit by these other factors. Let's take a look at what that would look like in New York. So let's get rid of federal. And go down to New York. And you see, of course, the CPLR, as I mentioned, that is legislative. We also see some family court rules. And within New York, we can limit by title to specific rules. What that looks like on Lexis. So again, just browsing. We see federal rules. We go state. Takes another minute. Scroll down to statutes. And we see New York state and federal court rules. And again, we can take a look at the table of contents as if we wanted to get more specific. Taking a look at what a search would bring us. Make sure to spell your search terms correctly. Let's go to statutes and legislation, and again, you can limit this in a pre-search filter as well. And Lexis is taking its time. So we see what I like about Lexis is in doing a statutes and court rules site, we can limit here to just court rules. So that's an advantage of Lexis, in my opinion, over Westlaw. If we go to the ever popular Bloomberg, take a look under litigation, and this gives you under federal rules. You can see the listing of the different types of rules. And likewise, we would navigate toward state. I want Connecticut, we want New York. And so you see New York court rules. A couple of other aspects about rules. You may find yourself in need of doing research on ethics rules. Ethics rules are a little tricky to find. Any ethics materials are a little tricky to find, in my opinion. Honestly, I think the best way on Westlaw is to type in your state and then rules of professional conduct, and you will tend to bring them up. Doing research in ethic rules is complex. We're not going to go into a great deal of detail here, but what you should know is that these rules are issued typically by the bar associations in New York, and those bar associations often issue comments interpreting those rules. Those comments are critical to know about if you are involved in an ethical matter or doing research on an ethical matter, but those comments are not available on Westlaw. So what you need to do is go to the New York State Bar Association Rules of Professional Conduct. And many states have their rules online. I won't say every single state because I haven't checked all 50 states, but many states do, and they're easy enough to find by Google. There's an ABA Center on Professional Responsibility you can find there, and that's probably more than enough detail we need to go into on ethical rules. Certainly on Westlaw, and they are available on Lexis as well. A little more difficult to find, honestly. I suggest that you contact their help should you need it at that time. But it is available in the statutory code, just as I said, a little more difficult to find. So probably more importantly, help in understanding the court rules, whether they are statutory procedural rules like the Civil Rules of Civil Procedure, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, or the New York CPLR, or they are more specific to courts. You want to look at some secondary sources. You may remember one good way to find secondary sources is to check a legal research guide. And here's our recommended legal treatises we used earlier in the semester for secondary sources. And we have a civil procedure heading under C. And you'll see two of the leading treatises on Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, Wright and Miller, Federal Practice and Procedure, Moore's Federal Practice. We also have a section for New York, and if you are practicing in New York, these are two resources you want to know about. New York Civil Practice CPLR, it's referred to as Weinstein, Korn & Miller. So if you are working at a firm or for an attorney and she or he tells you to look for Weinstein, Korn & Miller, this is what they're talking about. There's also New York Practice by David Siegel, a shorter one-volume set as opposed to a many-volume set. These are both standard treatises that are used for New York Civil Procedure. For those of you going to other states, learn your treatises in those states. Again, legal research guides from law schools in that state might help you out a great deal. You might also want to look for state practice books. So for instance, in Massachusetts, there's Massachusetts Practice will give you a treatise to help you with all the aspects of practice, but it will also help you understand how the rules apply to a particular situation. One odd quirk here in New York is that there is no set body of rules for evidence in New York. New York will refer to the Federal Rules of Evidence. One place to see how that would all work out practically, to get some background again, our secondary sources. And there are a couple of sets. The most frequently referred to is Prince Richardson on evidence, but there are these other two sets as well. So that is our quick look at rules. Two other aspects of cases and litigation are jury instructions and jury verdicts. Jury instructions essentially happen at the end of the proceeding, where the judge will ask both parties to submit recommended instructions that she or he, the judge, will then give to the jury. And there are sources, not surprisingly, for these instructions, the most famous of which are known as pattern jury instructions. And you will find many of the different sets of pattern jury instructions on Westlaw, because they're published by West. So if you type in jury instructions, you'll see federal, you'll see a general heading for jury instructions, which will give us this alphabetical list of the different states in which they are available. Notice it comes under secondary sources. Or if you can remember, again, for those of you staying in New York pattern jury instructions. And New York pattern and jury instructions, and possibly other states, I don't know for a fact, but I do know New York pattern jury instructions are actually used not only for the specific instance at the end of a trial when you want to submit jury instructions, but also they're used for as a secondary resource. I have had attorneys, typically attorneys first starting in their particular area, tell me that they have used New York pattern jury instructions just to get a very basic sense of a particular area of law. So I pulled up the New York pattern jury instructions and I typed in a hypothetical malpractice attorney search, just so you can see what the pattern jury instructions look like. And so it basically, what PJI, as it's known, will describe are the elements of a particular claim. So we're talking about negligence here. And to establish liability, AB must prove preponderance of the evidence. So you get a sense of what are the basic components of this particular issue. There's even a comment, as you can see, to help explain. You've got citations to cases. So again, classic secondary source, give you a start on your research, basic explanation, terminology, and citations to primary sources. So here, we can see an action for legal malpractice requires 3 essential elements. So again, PJI is good not only just for jury instructions in New York, but actually as a basic source, as a basic secondary source. Looking at other types of jury instructions, you will find New York criminal. Now, PJI, New York jury instructions is civil. You will find criminal jury instructions online only, interestingly. And good old Google once again. And there are many places you'll find this link, but it's just as easy to get there from Google, as you can see. And here are the New York criminal jury instructions. So you can look at instructions for general applicability, and here's what it looks like, different aspects of a criminal proceeding. Okay, Lexis does have jury instructions, but I have to say, because Lexis doesn't have PJI, which again is a West publication, so Lexis isn't going to have it. The coverage is not quite as, or not nearly as good, especially for New York, again, because the New York PJI is publisher specific. But what Lexis does, because it doesn't have the source that everybody refers to, is it will produce for you, let's see if we can pull it up, actual jury instructions in a case. So you can see it, citation. This is to an actual docket. Remember our dockets we talked about in the last screencast? So here is an actual docket. Now this is a Texas case because I didn't limit it to New York, but we could limit to New York to find New York-based jury instructions. And we do that, of course, on our filters, and we click on more because New York is further down in the list. And sure enough, there's only one. Not as good, not nearly as good as PJI, but if you are in an institution that only has Lexis, at least it's a little bit. Okay, and once again on Bloomberg in our litigation resources. Actually, you can see them here under New York also. So a couple of different ways to get to jury instructions. You see them down here or on that list we were just looking at. Last but not least, let's take a look at jury verdicts. These are basically recorded verdicts by juries, so if you get to the verdict and damages stage, you want to have an idea of what to ask for, and there are sources that do that for you. So once again, let's go back and look at Lexis, because I think Lexis has the neatest tool for that. So up here in Lexis Advanced, now you can do a regular search also, but what I'm going to show you is a little extra. So notice I have limited to New York, and let's search for legal malpractice. And notice I'm using the quotes. You need to use the quotes. If you don't, you'll wind up getting a message telling you that you have too many results. And why I like this Lexis Advanced Verdict and Settlement Analyzer is you get these neat graphs. So you can get all sorts of graphical number of cases per year by resolution, some neat information, and then you can scroll down and take a look at the actual verdicts themselves. What I'm going to do is I am going to filter by word amount, and I'm going to say low 2 million, high 8 million, and you may think I'm crazy. But sadly I'm not. The verdicts are that high. So if we were to take a look at one of these super duper high verdicts, wow, there are a lot of them. So here's one close to 8 million. Let's take a look at that. And it's recent too. Plaintiff verdict. So legal malpractice. So be warned. But you get a sense of not only what the numbers are, which I know is kind of dramatic, but you also get a summary of the case. So you hopefully can read and understand why that verdict was so unbelievably high. And yes, you can limit by more than just verdict amount. So we saw when we were looking briefly at the filters. Go back more. So you can limit by different aspects as well. Interestingly, let's see what that one looks like. Injury. So get a sense of that filter as well. Looking on regular Lexis, you could still find this information, and let's go back. That's not where we want to be. Come on. Lexis, be cooperative. There we go. So let's definitely find jurisdiction. Actually, in your jurisdiction, you can search, and this search will search the same information. It just won't give you those nice graphs. You can do this also on Westlaw. Admittedly, you don't get those nice graphs. So let's go back and limit by state. And you can see actually we could just search so we could just search jury verdicts, or if we, well, that's frustrating, should remember my jurisdiction, or if we just search all of New York. See what happens if we don't use legal malpractice. So you can see that's a filter as well. So that is it for part 2 of our makeup class. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.